Thank you for Isotope to host that meeting and to Laura for all the hard work and organizing the food and everything. I think it's important to keep the community going. And tonight, I'm going to talk about the topic about Monorepo versus Multirepo and the local dev environment should die. And those three things is basically the plan for this talk. Is I'm going to introduce what is a Monorepo, how does it compare to Multirepo, and why is it linked to the developer environment. So it's also about, because I don't like to advise to people to do this, do that, or don't do this, don't do that. I like to expose the fact and people make their own decision for what suits them better. Because I think to keep a critical thinking is actually a really nice skill to have. So it's going to be more about trade-offs and tooling and having all the code base in one place. And so I wanted to start by asking you a question, a little bit of, to get to know you. How do you know how to build, test, run, debug, deploy a project if you don't know about it? Like as a DevOps engineer or something, you might have to be confronted to that question. Like you have something, you say, what the hell is this? And you have to deal with it. So how do you find out?
Read me.
Sorry?
Read me.
Read me, okay. So that's inside the repository, right? So usually those information are, if you're lucky, inside the code. But what if there is nothing in the readme?
Make file.
Make file. Okay, so we're starting to get deeper and deeper into the scripts. And sometimes we have those very language-specific script that you need to run, like Gradle or Maven or NPM. Yes?
Find a hammer and basically hit it until it works.
Exactly, yeah. That's the state, actually. That's exactly just... And so keep in mind that question along that talk, because it's going to be a recurring theme. And so, who am I? I'm by formation, I'm a software engineer. I turned DevOps, and here I am. No, but I used to work at a place where they do things at scale. And you can contact me anytime if you have any question, if you want to know more. Just feel free. And so, but why we are doing microservices? Why are we even talking about monolith? And that's the little difference, is that a monorepo doesn't have to be a monolith. Yes?
Just to be a troll, not everything should be microservices.
True, but some people do microservices. And those people, they come and ask me this question. I say, no, we don't want that. We do microservices. And so the idea of a monorepo is not about the coupling of the code. It's more about the development workflow. Like, how do you onboard someone? How do you deploy? How do you make a change to a big project? And as you can see, we also have a lot of side code. Like you have the core, which is like the binary, but everything that is related to how do you build, how do you test, all your dependency, all that thing. And it's not the business logic anymore. You're digging really deep into, okay, how the language works, how to optimize, how to make things performant. And you can have multiple language, or do you want to have multiple projects entirely in the monorepo? So, yeah, and up until which point? Like, what's the size of a monorepo? What makes it acceptable? I'm pretty sure that some of you already working in a monorepo don't know it's a monorepo. So it really depends on your experience. And so everybody should do mono all the things? Well, let's see. Would you get a single cloud account provider or a single Kubernetes cluster for all your application? Do you know what's the maximum number of nodes the Kubernetes cluster can handle?
5,000.
I heard 1,000, but maybe you're right. At least from 1,000, you start to have problem with DNS, you start hitting some hard limit. And those things, you don't find them out until you hit production. You say, oh, damn, we should have thought about this. But nobody knows. It's like, what's the maximum number a Redis instance can handle? The maximum number of connections, sorry. Well, I had to find out the hard way, so I'll let you find out. But what about a single Slack channel? Just imagine how much, if you had all your, everything into one Slack channel, by the time you press enter, the thing will be so far up, nobody will ever read it. So, yes?
have on machine?
Yeah, that's the physical limit, but it's actually lower than that because you have 1024 that are reserved for the operating system, and so you have to kind of like dig around that. But because I don't remember the number, it's that much minus 1024.
So
Just so you know.
60,000 and you're fine.
Yeah, but I could be wrong. But yeah, and why not go back to a mainframe? You know, one big computer and put everything in it. And so you see where this is going. Why not one single chair that we call a bench and everybody sit on it? You know, it's a mono coffee machine. Who would go to the office then? And mononucleosis. That's a disease. That's just to show that if everything mono is not good. And so I found this article, Monorepo, please don't. And as much as I agree with everything that's in it, there is some things where Monorepo is actually really good and well suited. But what I want to explain is that this article is very well written and it's kind of true. But what is true is that at scale, if you cannot hold the whole repo on your hard drive, you lose all the advantages. So that's the limit, basically. That's the breaking point of your monorepo, is if you cannot have all the code in one place, and one instance, if you need to make a network request to get some code, this is where it's too big. That's how you're going to suffer, and you lose all the advantages, like easy collaboration and code sharing. Yes and no, but you know, it's like if you write one single dependency and everybody relies on it, then you have to make a change to that dependency. Good luck, have fun. You know, it's like you have to break everything everywhere. And no dependency management, that's a lie. It doesn't matter what they told you, you still have to manage a dependency, whether you wrote them or somebody else. And atomic commit, I lied, but when somebody will invent atomic deploy, I don't see how that's helped me, you know? Because if you have many instances, it doesn't matter if the code changed in one step, because you still have to deploy, and that deployment won't be instantaneous. So you have a lot of problems like that, you know, that's why I highlighted scalability, is because above a certain threshold, like you lose all the advantages. But some repository did it right. Do you know Babel, the transpiling engine from JavaScript to older JavaScript? They made a monorepo, and it's actually quite nice. You can see, I have here, this is the repository. As you can see, it sounds like a fairly well-maintained repository. The thing is that it's a plugin architecture. So you have a core, and you have all the plugins. So when you update the core, or you break the API of the core, you automatically can change all the plugins, which means that now you don't have to know that plugin X version 123 is compatible with core 5.0 or something like that. Here, the same version is compatible with the same version of the core. But so you can find some, you know, if you have too many branches and stuff, it can get bad really fast. So yeah, that's a bit of the idea, that sometimes if you have a plugin architecture or something that really depends on each other, they should be in the same repo. But so what do you put inside the monorepo? Do you want like all the libraries? Because I've seen repositories like that. We don't call them monorepo, we just call it like the library repository. Or all the frameworks, or do you put infrastructure code inside a project? Or you put every microservice, or do you choose, okay, all the backends from the Go language and all the backends from the JavaScript language? Or a whole department code? It really depends on your company and the culture around it, but all those things represent is different levels of abstraction. Different levels of abstraction. Different levels of abstraction. So the reason the reason I talk about different levels of abstraction is because that's the most single thing what people argue about. You know, when you see people arguing, it's just one saying, no, I like this experience, and people saying, yeah, but the build pipeline. So they're not talking about the same level of abstraction. They're talking about two different things, and they disagree about that. So if you want to avoid a lot of discussion about monorepo, multirepo, or the size of a repo, or the size of a microservices, just make sure that you're talking about the same metric or the same idea before you start saying no or you're wrong. And while doing research about chaos engineering, I find this report from the army. It's in the late 40s, and it's about pilot errors. And so the army did tons of study about psychological analysis and what makes people like performant. And they find out that the most error were because the dashboard of the airplanes were not consistent. So because the one airplane had the speed and the altitude at different places, the pilot was so it was so much information, he could not find it. And so 50% of the error was linked to the fact that they call it substitution error. So at one place they expected something that was replaced by somebody else, something else. And the next one is the adjustment error. And because things are not in the same place, they don't have the time to see and fine-tune, like to put the exact number or to put the exact parameter. They have to look and pay too much attention. And so, just imagine you're a pilot, you're in a war, and suddenly you see, do not press this big red button, or what is that quadrant there? And you don't have time. And so this is people's life. I mean, people die because of those things. And the army, what they did is that, okay, they standardize the dashboard. Not the plane, the dashboard. So if you're a pilot, you go to a plane and you see where everything is going to be the same everywhere. And so think about it when we build tools, like this uniformity across tools is what causes all the problem. Like you see something, you say, I have no idea how to build this. Or what is this dependency? Or why is this like using PyAmp and not virtual amp? Or those kind of things. And so I took that from GitLab, and they have this concept of from idea to production. And it's 10-step development lifecycle. The funny thing is, code is actually such a small part of the pipeline, But because it's early on, it impacts all the downstream events. So if you change the code, of course, the commit, but all that are different levels of abstraction. Each of those is a different level, and we can actually kind of uniform, like standardize is not the right word, but you know what I mean, like making something consistent across the board. And so when we talk about multi-repo, we usually associate one microservices or one services. It doesn't need to be micro, but one services to one repository. But can somebody know why we do microservices? Yes, James?
What if one microservice depends on another?
Sorry?
What if one microservice depends on another?
Is it an answer to the question?
No, it's a question.
Okay.
Cannot run independently without another microservice. Do you put both of them into separate repositories?
If that's the definition of abstraction. An abstraction is if two components fail. If one component fails and the other fails as well, they belong to the same abstraction. Otherwise, that is no point. If they are independent, well, guess what? One can live without the other, or can cope, without the other. It's like the organs. If one organ fails and the other can survive, that it's not a really like life-threatening organs. So it's a little bit the same idea. But do you know why we do microservices? Like, where does it come from? Any idea?
Scalability.
Okay, about what? What do we scale with microservices?
Organization.
Organization. Well done. I don't have chocolate to give, but you will definitely have one. So with microservices, you ship your organization because that's the communication between people that you scale. Because it's the Conway's law. It says that any organization that designs a system will inevitably produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure. So what does that mean? It means that if you ask a team of if you ask 3 teams to build a compiler, they will build a 3-phase compiler, because the way they communicate internally will be reflected into the architecture of the program, so that they don't need to talk to each other all the time. And that's the idea of the Monorepo, is that everybody can talk to anybody else, and everybody has the same right or the same access to everything. And this Moore law has brought a lot of attention to some guy named Jeff Bezos. And there is this Google employee in 2011. He started with a rant on Google+. I will try to see. So Google Plus didn't have the developer API, and he started screaming, and he thought the post was internal, so that private, nobody could see it, but it got leaked because Google Plus. And the problem is, he was working at Amazon in 2002, and he received an email by Jeff Bezos. Well, it was a mandate, so everybody received that email. And the first one of, the Bezos mandate was, all teams will henceforth expose the data and functionality through service interface. That's the first thing. Teams must communicate with each other through those interfaces. So already, you cannot access a data store, you cannot do anything but to go to those interfaces if you want to use another service data. There will be no other form of inter-process communication allowed. Like no backdoors, no direct reads, only the communication through those interfaces. Technology doesn't matter. All service interface must be externalizable, meaning I can give it to the client to call, and it should work, and it should be secure. Anyone who doesn't do this will be fired. So yeah, that's basically. 7, thank you, have a nice day. And he says like, number 7 was a joke. So basically, Bezos in 2002, he understood that, okay, you want to talk, you have to call an interface. You cannot send email, you cannot do weird stuff. You have to go through those interfaces. And they had some people who were in charge of making sure those interfaces were extensible and externalizable. And so there is this artist, Manu Cornet. He drew those org chart of big company. And you see, this is Amazon. Then you have Google, because Google has a Monorepo, and you can see everybody's the boss of everybody else there. Then you have Facebook, where everybody's connected. Yeah, that's Microsoft. Apple, with the mothership. And Oracle, where the legal is 10 times the size of the engineering department. But I mean, how many companies I see like that? You know, I go to a new company and the IT department is this small and provide a feature for the whole thing. Like companies that don't understand that they are software company, they usually do that. Yes, James?
But you forgot all the consultants in that whole chart.
Yeah. You know, you can tell the guy. He done that a while ago. I don't think he took that into account. What was I saying? Oh yeah, many companies, they have an IT department, which is kind of like astonishing when you think about it, because every department needs some IT, but they just concentrated. And so, of course, all the internal product they built is very IT oriented, you know? I mean, I was one of those people. I built some horrible interface. I still feel sorry about it and try to make it up for it since now, you know? But so, okay, so you get the idea of, you know, why we do the things we do, what's a Monorepo, but let's talk about the tooling now. We can have, the first one you're gonna have to learn is Git. And I was started this presentation with a deep dive about Git, and I realized, well, 4 hours is not enough, so I just changed the topic and start to make something that could be interesting. But if you are interested into Git, you can check this deep dive. It's really well done. It's by Edward Thompson. Basically, Git is a hash function and a database on the file system. It's really smartly done, but it can be crazy complicated. But yeah, basically once you put things in Git, you will not delete them by mistake, ever. And so that's the point. You know, you don't have to lose your data, but you still need to learn what it does under the hood. And so when you want a Monorepo with Git, you can do like plain Git, with just everything into one. You can use subtrees. So subtrees, they're a little bit different because it's like a subfolder of the Monorepo is mapped to different repository. So vaguely defined. Git's modules, it's a black box. Some people use it for dependency. I can tell you by experience, it's hard to manage. And some people just do custom script. And so this is typically what happened in a monorepo. Like this is the branch, and you might have a really hard time finding a way. And if you're not disciplined, you're gonna end up like screaming, because that is basically, I don't know, this is maybe 30 people monorepo working on it. If you have 100 developers, it's gonna be even more. So you might want to reconsider your branching strategy, whether it's merge or rebase, and those things impact the readability of the history. But so the concept to keep in mind is that the code storage is different from the deployment. And so you can actually keep your monorepo and split it into many repos. So the developer have the monorepo on the laptop, but you have a tool that split it behind the scene and deploy it individually. So that's kind of like the developer experience workflow, if you want that. And the thing is, you still have to build those tools, but some of them already build them for you. You just have to learn those tools. It's build or buy, you know. That's a strategy choice. It's not a technological choice. And so yeah, I put a list of few. If you want Splitish, that's the tool that will split your repository. So if you have a monorepo and you want to split it to many repo, you can go that way. Bazel, which is a build tool, you have to manually route your dependency. So you have to give the graph dependency to Bazel so that you understand what are your dependency for him to build a monorepo. Your Learner is also a monorepo builder, but for JavaScript. And you have a project called ToMono. And that is, if you have many repository, you want to go to one monorepo. Many repository to monorepo. So you can go from monorepo to many to mono. And the last one is a list of resources. I highly recommend you check it before you start thinking about the monorepo, so you have some idea of people who've gone through that, and you read the pain point before you start the journey. Yes, James?
Yeah, that last one is answer my question partially. What happens when somebody does a force push or a rebase and there are 100 developers?
Well, usually, I mean, that's kind of like common sense. You should not have write access to the merge, admin access to the master branch usually. I mean, those branches are usually protected. I don't know. That's the default. I never thought about that question because that's the default. I never let anybody force push the master because it just goes to common sense. Just imagine suddenly the build pipeline start working and you push something to production without anybody knowing. That's crazy to me. But yeah, I'm not perfect, but this is the first step of keeping track of who does what, is having the master branch protected. And so if one day your monorepo gets too big, you don't have to keep the history forever. So you have one command, it's a git clone. And git clone, you can tell the date from which you want the history, and it will give it to you. And you can even build a script that just archive every day at midnight or something the history, because I mean, unless you have a bug and you have to track down maybe years before where that bug come from, I don't see the point of having 5 years history on your laptop. It's just taking space for nothing. But maybe some people do. I don't know. I work in the government agency, and basically we had to keep track of every year's new law that was coming up. So yeah, you had to keep at least 2 years of history for the repository. But so yeah, getting good at monorepo also means you're gonna get good at Git, and it's internal, or at least understand it. And by the way, this is not monorepo specific, but this is the path you choose if you choose monorepo. Being disciplined about code reuse and dependency, again, not specific to monorepo. Being disciplined for branches, PR, and documentation, because now you have a monorepo. If you break something, it's going to be broken for everybody. So just imagine, multiply the time developer are just idle. Yeah, that's going to be hard. And you might want to think about implementing feature toggle and doing A/B testing, because now that's one way you have to do the test. You cannot just deploy multiple versions because it's a monorepo now. So yeah, it's kind of difficult. And you have to have the whole picture on your laptop. So basically, the Linux kernel is 20 gigabytes. If you have something bigger than that, it's possible, but you might want to reconsider or at least split some services depending on which organization and which team work on what. Understanding versioning. Do you know what's a version? Do you know what Git tags are? Do you know they are not immutable, that you can change? So yeah, immutable build. That means that for one build, from one version of the code, you will always get the same binary. If you use semver, you don't have that. Sorry, but if I roll the dice and see what kind of dependency I get today, it doesn't work. Because again, those versions are mapped to Git tags, and Git tags can change, and people do change them. So if you're relying on external dependency, it can be hard. You can have a hard surprise in production, like why the build failed today. And you find out that, oh, some guy rolled back a version because there was a security issue, and you never have the same build. So how can you be sure that the pipeline won't fail? Yeah, that's kind of like thing you need to think about. But being disciplined relates to the engineering culture. So that has nothing to do, well, nothing. It's very probably coupled to the fact that you're using a monorepo or not. It's more about, okay, what's our strategy for testing? What's the branching? What is the good size for a PR? I work at places where more than 500 lines of code, a PR was automatically rejected. If you modify more than 500 lines of code, nobody looked at it, and so you had to break down, test included. So you had to make very precise and small amounts so that the deployment was, I mean, not easy, but at least trackable. You know which PR introduced the problem. But okay, we talk about Monorepo, Multirepo, the tooling, but what about the developer environment? Because that's the point, that's the reason we have a Monorepo, is because we want to make change everywhere. We want to break things and not break things in production. Well, what's an environment? Do you know? Somebody guess? Yes, James?
Whatever configuration you happen to get to work at the time you were introduced to the company?
Yeah, it's a configuration. Basically, an environment is introducing everything that's not related to the code. More or less. It's a vaguely defined, but the thing is that what we're trying to do with our laptop is to reproduce the production environment on a laptop. And the thing is that we want to make change and know that if something breaks here, it breaks there. It must break there as well. If something passes on the laptop, it passes on the production as well. That's why we try to mimic. But the code is usually much smaller than the project code. And so this is an idea that can help you with that. I've used it for a few years, and it proved very non-disruptive. So if you use Git submodules, let's say you have 10 teams, and each team work on different, I would say, services. They don't need all the repository at the same time, but they like to have the same environment within the team. So what you can do is to use what we call, there's this repository called script to rule them all. It's actually kind of an API, it's like a standard. They put on every repo a script folder with one day, inside you have a list of scripts that build, test, run, build a Docker image, whatever, run the CI test, run the integration test, and all those things. So that you know exactly where to look when you want to do something to a repository. You know that you can run all the unit tests. And if you have a container runtime on your laptop, you don't even need to install the dependency. So maybe let's see a little bit what it looks like. So this afternoon, I quickly created a project and I added into a Git submodule. Does anybody know a repository on GitHub? Tell one right now. That's not 20 gigabyte. Yes?
You really want the SQL.
Sorry?
Microsoft ASP.NET Core.
Okay.
Just for the hell of it.
Microsoft
I don't know, it's not
ISP.
called.
Yeah. Is it point? Is it comma? I don't know.
No, but I know that one is huge.
Maybe VS Code. VS Code, that's good. Woo! It works. So you have one subcommand, one command that is git submodule. Yeah, I'm gonna clog all the network, but that's okay. So with one subcommand, you can one command you can add the submodules, and that repository is not connected to the main repository in any way. This main repository is just where you put the script that you want to share with your colleagues. And so you kind of have a common ground when everybody say, oh, I added some data for the test database so you can run things locally or do, you share your environment at that one because it's codified. You have a trace. It's not a bash script laying on the laptop on the disk somewhere. And so it's here, and if I run, can you see?
Yes.
Okay. So I made an npm script. I use npm because I was too lazy to write bash. But you see, I just added some of those pre-formatted commands. And if you see this one, you have git submodule for each. So now you can run command on all your sub-repository, your submodules, and that provides an interface. Because if I do, for instance, this one, if I want to build all my submodule repository, I just have to do this, because in every single repository, I made a build, and if I can do it, okay, and now it's building everything. And I don't need to know what kind of dependency, and of course VS Code doesn't have one because I haven't set the interface there. But let's see, I can just edit. It already has a script. Yeah, you see, the VS Code understand, they already have, they don't call it build, maybe they call it npm. Yeah, it's with the URL and stuff. Exactly. So they're already following that. I didn't know, but they use a slightly different interface because they use npm to build instead of calling it build. Because they only use, I guess, TypeScript or something. But you get the idea. So this is very easy to share with a colleague because it's an opt-in mechanism. Everybody can still keep the multi-repo on, separated. But if you want to share the dev environment, this is what you share. Now, what is the next problem you're going to get with that? It's a too small laptop. Because if you really want to have production, you're going to have to run a Cassandra cluster or some massive database or some too many of those microservices. And why? Or you're going to have to mock services. And those mock are going to get out of date, so it will work against the mock, but not in production. And so this local environment thing is really a disease because we have too many services at some point. And so the idea is maybe we need to have a cloud, like a remote dev environment that you can bring up and tear down, and everybody gets the same, so that it doesn't have like, now it works on my machine, you will get, now it works on my cluster. So it's easier, I would say. Because if you fix it for someone, you fix it for everybody. And yeah, it's about being efficient versus effective. So efficient is doing a task good, but effective is doing the useful task. And so if you want to see very much what it looks like, you can check git.pod.io. I think I have it here. So yeah, so the idea is that you take the URL and you take gitpod and you add the hash, and I think that, yes. So it will clone the Git repository, spin up a container, and you will have a fully blown developer environment ready to go with a terminal and everything in your browser. So no more local dependency, no more versioning manager, no more install 10,000 thing, or no more onboarding list. You know, every time I join a company, it's like, okay, let's spend a few weeks setting you up before you can get the credentials and everything. And so, as you can see, this now is installing the dependency, and I can start coding right away. I don't need to install everything. Everything is open source, everything's out there. Just check it out. And there is the same for front end. Code Sandbox. Does anybody use that? Nobody? Well, if you ever want to start, this is really, really great. No dependency at all. You start and you in the browser, you can start and it will get reproduced right away. So you get everything in your browser. You don't have to, and this works offline too. Doesn't mean because it's your browser you need to be connected. So yeah, you can a bit dependency, but I wanted to show that this is a Docker container and you can spin up other Docker container and just, it's really neat trick. If you want to have your own, this is Eclipse shape. So you can have Eclipse in the browser now. If you're doing some more advanced thing, it's quite neat. I highly recommend that you look at those because they are coming. Cloud provider already offers some solution that lets you develop inside the cloud provider, and it's very much going that way. So thank you. Do you have any questions?
So should you go Monorepo or not?
I would say not. But it's up to you. If you have a good use case, if your team understand the trade-off, I think it's a good way to deal with it. But there is a few constraints and you might not be ready. You have to set up the pipeline accordingly. Yes, James?
Just a lighter question. Was there any time when the instructions, the onboarding instructions actually worked?
I'm usually the guy who fixes them because, you know, like, okay. And it's usually never in one place. They have some horrible, halfway baked static website that is hanging somewhere that nobody updates. Like, you know, there's this thing called Confluence. This is the data graveyard. This is where data goes to die. Never update, nobody use that. It's useless. Don't spend. And some people that are not tech related, they think that's the gold mine. Like everything is going to be on there. So everybody is just miscommunication happen, and you have no idea the amount of work that is duplicated because those data are not right. But yeah, what do I know, right?
At least I'm not totally on that problem.
Okay, thank you very much.